Iwo Jima. Just 21 square kilometers of black volcanic sand in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. And yet, in February 1945, this tiny spot on the map became the place where the fate of thousands of people was decided, and where one of the most iconic images of World War II was born. On February 19, 1945, Operation Detachment began, a large-scale American attempt to capture the island and its airfields. The task sounded simple: to obtain a foothold for aviation, ensure emergency landings, and create a base for further pressure on Japanese territories. But maps and orders could not show the main thing. Hidden beneath the surface of Iwo Jima was a system of defensive structures: tunnels, caves, and camouflaged embrasures. What appeared to be just a hill and a beach turned out to be a fortress. Why did this small island become so important? Because in the modern military world, control of the air and the ability to quickly deploy aircraft determined the outcome of operations. The airfields of Iwo Jima made it possible to fly closer to Japan, cover ships, and rescue damaged aircraft. Control of this piece of land meant much more than its size. It was the key to the next stage of the Pacific Campaign. But even the technically well-prepared landing encountered the unexpected. Black volcanic sand slowed the advance like glue. Coastal positions were carefully manned, and Japanese defenders used not only firepower, they used secrecy, a network of underground passages. But even the technically prepared landing force encountered the unexpected. Black volcanic sand slowed the advance like glue. Coastal positions were carefully manned, and Japanese defenders used not only firepower, they used secrecy. A network of underground passages, hidden outlets, and concealed batteries. The attackers faced an invisible enemy that appeared suddenly, where, according to all maps, there should have been no threat. And yet one image managed to puzzle and inspire the whole world: the photograph of the flag being raised on the summit of Suribachi. One frame, and many interpretations. A symbol of hope, proof of courage, but at the same time a reminder of the terrible price paid by soldiers on both sides of the barricades. Today, we will begin to analyze the Battle of Iwo Jima step by step, from the political and strategic context to the tactics in the trenches and the personal stories of those who found themselves in this small but fateful place. The questions we will seek to answer are: how did the plan become reality? What mistakes and discoveries changed the course of the battle? And what price did people pay for control of this tiny strip of land? Before troops set foot on the black sand of Iwo Jima, the strategy and calculations had been months in the making. The operation was codenamed Detachment. The landing began on February 19, 1945, and continued until March 26, 1945. This was not a fleeting skirmish, but a planned, large-scale sea-air expeditionary operation aimed at securing a foothold for aviation and reducing the distance to the Japanese islands. The command structure was complex and multi-level. The Navy's bypass headquarters was the 5th Fleet, under the overall command of Admiral Raymond A. Spruance. The amphibious forces were coordinated by Vice Admiral Richmond K. Kelly Turner, and the V Amphibious Corps provided direct command of the landing forces. This command structure reflected the scale of the forces involved, from aircraft carriers and battleships to thousands of Marines and naval artillery installations. Why Iwo Jima? The island had airfields that could serve as emergency landing sites for damaged aircraft, and as a base for fighter planes covering future operations closer to the Japanese coast. Control of the airfields meant reduced risks for long-range air raids and increased effectiveness of air strikes. That is, the island's strategic value was disproportionately large relative to its geographical size. 3 Marine divisions were prepared for the assault. The 4th and 5th divisions were in the initial landing, while the 3rd division was held in reserve and called upon as needed. The V Amphibious Corps, commanded by colonels and generals, prepared for a classic amphibious assault. A sea of artillery, aircraft, landing craft, and logistics to support the advance on the island. Planners expected a relatively quick capture if events unfolded favorably, but the plan was met with the unexpected reality of the defenses. Intelligence and preliminary bombing were seen as the key to success. The fleets spent weeks on artillery preparation and airstrikes against Japanese positions. However, the Japanese command, led by General Tadami Kuriya, chose an unusual strategy. Instead of meeting the landing force on the beach with massive counterattacks, they retreated deep into the island, setting up a network of underground passages, fortified bunkers, and hidden embrasures. This turned the surface into a decoy, and the real defense into an underground fortress that was extremely difficult to suppress from the air or with artillery. The Japanese garrison numbered about 20,000 men, well entrenched in their defenses. The losses were colossal: thousands killed and tens of thousands wounded. Figures that underscore the fact that Iwo Jima became one of the most difficult. Finally, the scale and cost of the operation. According to primary sources, the total number of forces involved on the American side exceeded 100,000 personnel and hundreds of support ships. The Japanese garrison numbered around 20,000 personnel, well entrenched in their defenses. The losses were colossal: thousands killed and tens of thousands wounded. Figures that underscore the fact that Iwo Jima became one of the most difficult and bloody chapters in the history of the U.S. Marine Corps. Dawn on February 19, 1945. The sky above the waves is covered with a light haze from the night's artillery preparation. The horizon is lined with battleships and aircraft carriers. The ships carried out one of the most intense preparatory bombardments in history. Artillery and aircraft pounded visible positions for a whole day. It seemed that only the ruins of fortifications would greet the shore. But appearances do not always coincide with reality. The first wave approached the shore in amphibious transporters and LVTS, amphibious vehicles, which were supposed to overcome the reefs and deliver people to the sand. This is where the first problem arose. The coral reef and shallow water delayed the landing, many vehicles ran aground, and soldiers were forced to walk through the water under machine gun fire. The black volcanic sand, fine and sticky, made it difficult to move quickly, and when they tried to dig in, the trenches did not hold. The dust crumbled, and the shelters were unreliable. The Japanese, trained by General Tadami Kuribayashi, chose a strategy that was almost unheard of in World War II. They did not attempt to repel the landing forces directly on the shore with massive counterattacks. They used the advantage of the terrain and time, retreating deep into the island, where they created an extensive system of tunnels, embrasures, and hidden firing points. Most of their defenses were underground or camouflaged in the rocks. Reinforced caves, stone embrasures, and narrow passages through which they could appear suddenly and deliver a deadly blow. On the shore, the fighting quickly turned into bloody, tedious, and brutal work to clear every handful of sand and every stone. American units advanced along the road, building a shoulder for supplies. But every attempt to go further was met with heavy fire from unexpected points. Hand grenades, machine guns, sniper fire, all this made progress slow and costly. The war took on the form of cleansing. To eliminate Japanese positions, it was necessary to storm the entrances to the tunnels. Everything from petrol bombs and flamethrowers to explosives and explosive cassettes was used for this purpose. Often, the assault ended with artillerymen and sappers filling the entrances with smoke or fuses, and then assault groups entering the caves by the light of flashlights and short-range illumination grenades. These actions were deadly dangerous. Camouflaged traps, collapses, and sudden attacks by defenders claimed the lives of many soldiers. 4 days after landing, an episode occurred that became symbolic of this campaign. On February 23rd, a small detachment climbed to the top of Suribachi and raised the flag. For many people in America, this moment became a sign of hope, proof that victory was on the way. The photograph of this ascent quickly spread around the world and became one of the most famous images of the war. But the photograph itself is only a fragment. The battle continued, and the concentration of Japanese defenses in the depths of the island meant that taking one peak did not solve the problem of the other fortifications. The Americans' tactics changed on the fly. Where artillery could not destroy the shelters, special tank destroyers and flamethrowers were used. Where amphibious raids were difficult, engineering support was mobilized. Where simple attacks led to heavy losses, combined assaults were devised, synchronizing artillery preparation and aviation. All this required time, resources, and tough human decisions. The first few days revealed a key truth about Iwo Jima. The technical superiority of the fleet and air force did not guarantee an easy victory against a well-planned and stubborn defense organized deep within the terrain. The battle became a contest of terrain and engineering, with victory coming slowly and at a high cost. When the artillery fire subsided and the smoke cleared, the real battle often began underground. The Japanese defense of Iwo Jima was conceived as a defense in depth. Not a frontal wall on the beach, but a network of passages, caves, and embrasures built into the rocks and hills. These tunnels connected positions, ammunition depots, rest areas, and hidden artillery, turning the island into a living fortress. How were the Japanese fortifications constructed? Tunnels were carved into layers of volcanic rock. Hidden entrances and camouflaged embrasures were created. Connecting passages allowed defenders to appear where the attackers considered themselves to be relatively safe. Many positions were reinforced with steel and concrete. Ammunition and water supplies were stored nearby. This system allowed the Japanese to withstand prolonged artillery and air pressure while retaining the ability to launch surprise attacks at close range. To destroy and clear these fortifications, the Americans had to use a combination of engineering and firepower. Flamethrowers, incendiary mixtures, and explosive devices were used to seal or destroy passages. Sappers and assault teams used smoke grenades and illumination charges, then rolled inside to flush the enemy out of their cover. Often, it came down to storming narrow entrances, where every second determined who would survive. The tactics were ruthless. In conditions where the enemy was protected underground and direct suppression was useless, local solutions that cost lives were required, from blowing up entrances to methodically clearing each niche one by one. These were not grandiose assaults on a broad front, but hard, dirty, and personal work. Hand-to-hand combat in confined spaces, blows with rifle butts, short bursts of pistol fire, and grenades thrown into the labyrinth. The victory, achieved through the systematic clearing of underground fortifications, left behind mixed feelings. On the one hand, it was a professional task carried out by engineers, Marines, and sappers. On the other, it was a series of acts of close and uncompromising violence that burned the consciences and minds of many participants. The inability to see the enemy until the moment of collision, the smell of burning fuel, the screams in the underground passages, all this left an impression that could not be erased by simply returning home. Interestingly, the Japanese strategy of holding back and wearing down the enemy achieved its goal. The Americans paid for every step they took. But Kuribayashi's tactics were not just a method of military resistance. They were a conscious moral gamble, to fight to the end, denying the enemy an easy victory. The commander abandoned traditional mass attacks in favor of a deep, prepared, and well-thought-out defense. This changed the nature of the battle. It became not an instant assault, but a test of perseverance and endurance. On February 23, 1945, an event took place at the summit of Suribachi that would quickly transcend tactics and become a cultural symbol of the war. Photographer Joe Rosenthal captured the moment when 6 men raised the American flag. This image is not just a photograph. It is a visual marker that, in a single second, transformed the chaos of battle into an image understood by millions. It is important to distinguish between 2 scenes that are often confused. Early in the morning, a small patrol led by Lieutenant Harold Schreer did indeed raise the first flag, which was captured by Navy photographer Lewis Lowry. Later, when a large replacement flagpole was brought to the summit, and Rosenthal's famous shot was taken, it was the second flag raising of the day. These 2 moments are close in time, but different in significance in the eyes of the public. Rosenthal's photograph instantly became a powerful symbol. It was reproduced in newspapers and on posters. It was used as the basis for the famous poster for the 7th War Bond campaign. And, according to official estimates, the image played a huge role in raising funds for war loans in 1945. Rosenthal himself received the Pulitzer Prize for the photograph that same year, an award that confirmed the power of the image as a journalistic and cultural artifact. We have come to the part of the story where numbers and facts help us understand the cost and consequences. How many people were involved? What losses the sides suffered? What exactly Iwo Jima achieved from a military point of view? And how the battle is remembered by different nations. Operation Detachment was conducted from February 19th to March 26th, 1945, involving large forces from the U.S. Navy, Air Force, and Marine Corps. The total number of American forces involved, including support units and ships, is estimated at tens of thousands. The Japanese garrison on the island numbered about 20,000 men, organized into a dense, deeply entrenched defense system. According to official Navy, Marine Corps, and museum sources, American losses in the main phase of the campaign amounted to approximately 6,800 to 6,900 killed and about 19,000 to 20,000 wounded, for a total of more than 26,000 American casualties, killed, wounded, exhausted, etc. The Japanese side suffered catastrophic losses, approximately 20,000 killed, the vast majority of the garrison. These figures underscore that Iwo Jima was one of the bloodiest and most costly battles in the Pacific. Officially, one of the key justifications for the capture of Iwo Jima was its airfields, which could serve as emergency landing sites for damaged B-29s and as a base for fighter cover, reducing the distance to Japan and increasing the safety of strategic raids. Conservative estimates indicate that approximately 2,200 to 2,450 B-29 landings were recorded on the island after its capture, which indeed saved thousands of crews from perishing in the ocean. However, historians and aviation experts note an important caveat. Not all of these landings were emergency ones. A significant proportion of them could have been training flights, scheduled refueling stops, or technical landings, rather than rescues of crews after combat malfunctions. As a result, the assessment of how many lives Iwo Jima saved remains a subject of debate. Some sources give substantial numbers of lives saved, thanks to emergency landings, while others call for a more cautious interpretation of the statistics and consideration of the proportion of scheduled landings. In the short term, holding Iwo Jima did provide American strategists with a more convenient base for air support, evacuation of downed pilots, and use of the island as a staging point. This reduced the risks of individual raids and provided additional flexibility in operations over Japan. Long-term and strategic. Some historians question whether the price paid at Iwo Jima was justified for the ultimate goal, the unavoidable necessity of defeating Japan. The arguments fall into two camps. Some historians consider the island an important and necessary staging ground, while others point out that by the end of the fighting, the impact of Iwo Jima's airfields on the outcome of the war was limited compared to the overall power of the Air Force and Navy. This debate highlights that military value is always measured not only by a map, but also by the cost in human lives and resources. During and after the Battle of Iwo Jima, acts of exceptional bravery were recorded. Dozens of medals, including the Medal of Honor, and other awards for heroism on the island. However, award statistics and memorial records are not just numbers. They are the names and fates of people, many of whom did not return home. The lessons of Iwo Jima have been incorporated into military courses on amphibious operations, engineering clearance of fortified positions, and the psychology of survival in extreme conditions. The Battle of Iwo Jima and subsequent operations strengthened the U.S. military position in the Pacific and played a role in shaping post-war security in the region. Today, Iwo Jima remains a place of remembrance for both countries. Joint memorial initiatives and recent official visits by senior Japanese and American officials show how the site of conflict has, over time, become a symbol of reconciliation and remembrance. This is yet another example of how military history is transformed into diplomatic and cultural memory. Iwo Jima is an example of how a small piece of land can exact a disproportionate price. The numbers, tens of thousands killed and wounded, hundreds of ships, thousands of aircraft, help to understand the scale. But the essence of the battle also lies in human destinies, tactics, and how the memory of the event shapes future generations. The question of whether the price was worth it remains open and debated among historians. For some, Iwo Jima was a necessary stop on the road to victory. For others, it is a tragic illustration of how war consumes the very meaning of victory.